Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Dave, and today I'm joined by Alejandro. How are you doing today, sir?
Hey, doing well, doing well.
So, if you'd be so kind to just kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you, and as always, folks, down in the description, you can find links to QuestHaven and what they're all about.
All right. Well, I'm Alejandro, developer behind QuestHaven. I used to be a forever DM. Now I've been playing a little bit as a player as well. And yeah, we're developing QuestHaven. It's a virtual tabletop for playing games like Dungeons and Dragons and other TTRPGs on PC and also inside virtual reality.
So, so what's kind of like the elevator pitch? Because at this point, like we talked about a little bit before we went live, like you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a VTT at this point. I feel like there's so many of them. What is the pitch for Quest Haven, and what kind of led you guys to develop your own?
Well, it's a series of things. One, we were aiming to make a virtual tabletop that is easy to use without a huge learning curve. Many VTTs, like there's so many systems in them that they can be a bit overwhelming to GMs, especially new game masters, right? But definitely the big thing is the ability to, if you're in VR, you can press a button and all of a sudden you become the figure. So you can be moving your figure in VR and you can at the press of a button, you become the figure. You're looking up at that orc that you're talking about how you're going to attack.
Uh-huh.
And if you're a dwarf and you're looking up at an orc, it's like, oh, you're no longer going to say, oh yeah, I'm just going to decapitate it. It's more of how am I going to actually do that, because you all of a sudden have this sense of scale and presence in the world.
Now that's crazy because I realized that it had the VTT or the virtual the VR aspect of it, where you're like at the table with your avatar and rolling dice and moving your mini around. I didn't know you could actually jump into your mini and get the mini's perspective. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's also great for just like role playing in general. I mean, yeah, you can use it in combat, but it's equally as exciting to be like in front of the merchant and have your GM take over the merchant and be waving at you and like moving around and you know, um, it's also interesting as a player to look down at the minis and then someone takes over the mini and see the mini waving up at you.
That yeah, that is kind of crazy. Um, so I know like I know my son was in a pre-college program for engineering, and so he'd have to like take classes during the summer, and he'd go to Rowan, and like one of the things that they got to do was to play around with VR, but also AR as well. And it was like a horror game with flashlights basically, but this
Mhm.
augmented reality, and that's one of the things I started thinking about right away. And you had asked me before we got started if I had any experience with VR, and I don't really think I have. I think maybe as a kid, like this would have been like 30 years ago
At the big
at a
arcades.
big arcade, but I suspect the technology is a little bit more advanced now.
Definitely, definitely. It's changed a lot. I mean, I remember going to Disney Quest and trying VR there
Yeah.
back when it was like this huge thing, and um, you know what what you have at your home now is better than the huge hundreds of $1,000 setup that they had back then. You know.
So how did this come about? What made you decide to throw your kind of hat in the VTT ring and do something a little bit different?
It was a number of things. One, there was some frustration when me and my group did try VTT. Not going to say any names, but
Yeah.
it was the learning curve was the big one, uh, where it was difficult to get a campaign up and running. So that was one thing. Two, when we started looking at this in VR, VR is a great technology. but there's this thing with it where once you put on the helmet, you're sort of isolated, right? You don't see what's around you. So the logical next step is, oh, you want to be around people, so you have these social experiences. So to us, it made sense. Like, oh, D&D is a social experience. Tabletop gaming is a social experience, and you get the sense of presence when you're with people there. So yeah, it just sort of made sense for us to sort of bring them together.
What and so what was your background before QuestHaven?
Well, before QuestHaven, actually, before QuestHaven, I was doing some work with AR applications. But before that, I was actually in project management and construction. And then COVID came, and I was like, you know what? This is a great time to, just pursue my dreams of becoming a game developer. It was always something that I had wanted to do, and I saw it more like something that I was going to do later in my life. And then that whole shutdown,
Yeah.
where I'm at, we got shut down for about 6 months. And it was just, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do a 360 on my career.
So were there any like early experiments at the table with AR for your games?
Definitely. We there was an early prototype. I got on my phone and it had the dungeon, and I would move it around. And I'm excited to maybe do something with AR in the future.
Yeah.
But the main factor there is battery life. Imagine getting home from work after the whole day. Now you're gonna open up a D&D app for playing, or tabletop RPG. Sorry, I mostly play D&D, so
No
I tend
worries.
to intermix my words. But you open up your app, and now you're gonna play. And AR, you're not gonna be able to have that 3-hour session before your phone just dies.
Yeah, I mean, I know just using like the character sheet from D&D Beyond on my phone, towards the end of the session, I'm at like 3%.
Did you ever play Pokemon Go?
No. All my family did, but I did not get into it.
Okay, so anyone who's played Pokemon Go knows that you open up the app, and within the hour, your phone is already having some serious issues, if it's on at all. It's very battery intensive.
I've seen a couple of other companies trying to move into the D&D space with AR, right? And they all have either discs or cards that you lay down, and then you could like look through your phone and you see the thing. And then also like at the higher
Yeah,
end, you have glasses.
it's definitely interesting.
Yeah.
And I've seen there's some of them that use the glasses, which those like dealing with the battery life issue is definitely going to be the biggest challenge. Um, and there's definitely some things like the Tilt 5. I don't know if you've seen that one. It's an AR board, and you put on some glasses, and you've got a wand, and you can move things around inside this virtual table, holographic table, and it's really cool.
Oh, did they have a big Kickstarter a couple years, like a year or two ago?
Yeah.
I don't know if it was out specifically or another one, but like they sold it. It was being kind of pitched as like a generic, like, oh, play your tabletop, play
Yeah,
tabletop games.
it's a console, and it doesn't just have to be tabletop games. Like, when you think about it, there's lots of things that you can do with that. But obviously, it's a board. You put it on table. Tabletop's the first thing that comes to mind.
The most important thing is you can play that game from Star Wars. Just never forget to let the Wookiee win, and you'll be fine. So, how did you get into gaming?
I've always been a gamer. My older brother, he's 8 years older than me, and he was a gamer. So like, I would see him game, and it was this thing. I really enjoyed playing Warcraft 3. And from there, I've just always been gaming different genres. I'm really bad
I am
at
literally
FPS.
the older brother that is 8 years older that got my younger brother into it. So.
There you go. You see how hobbies can sort
Yeah,
of
yeah. Well,
bring
I
brothers
mean,
together.
back in the day, like it was a lot harder to get into the hobby, pre-internet. Yeah, like to even know what D&D was. So it's like it was always like there was an older kid in your neighborhood that would
Uh-huh.
then like recruit the younger kids because D&D definitely wasn't a cool thing, but because you're older, like the younger kids will just think you're cooler. And then in hindsight, you're like, oh no, we were all just dorks, but we had
Yeah,
fun.
that happened to me with Magic the Gathering. Like
Yeah.
I had a deck, I built a deck, and I would play it with my brother's friends, but none of my friends were interested. None of my friends at school were interested in playing Magic.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's like, oh, I had my deck and couldn't really play much with it.
Yeah, you said you're generally a forever DM.
Yeah, that's changed recently. So I'm happy about that.
How did you break those shackles?
Well, one of my players was interested in DMing, and I was like, that is an excellent idea. So we went from there. And he ran Lost Minds of Fandelver, and I had a lot of fun running in College of Eloquence Bard.
Oh, nice. Yeah, it's a really tough fine line of encouraging them without being over enthusiastic, so you don't scare them away. I know like I was a forever DM until I was kind of like I just grabbed some of the players at my table and be like, hey, why don't you sit over here behind the screen? You'll be great. And kind of maybe bullied them a little bit into DMing, but they liked it. They loved it in the end. Now they're all DMs. So you mentioned that you mainly play D&D. Have you played any other games?
Not really. We really play a very homebrewed version of D&D. So it's like we we sometimes come up with rules that we implement, and it's more of a what we use from D&D is the movement system and the spells list,
Mm-hmm.
and we go from there.
Yeah,
But I'm definitely excited to try other tabletop RPGs in the future.
yeah. I think it's pretty common to homebrew stuff, especially if you're not running like a lot of like pre-written adventures and stuff like that. Are you guys playing fifth edition?
Yeah, yeah.
Which edition did you start with?
Fifth edition. I actually way back in the day, when I was in middle school, I read up uh, a lot up on 3.5e,
Uh,
and I believe GURPS as well. And I went ahead and created characters, but never got around to actually getting the group together to use them.
that is an all too common story.
Yeah.
I remember like there must have been like the one summer as a kid, like every one of us would show up with a different RPG every week, and we'd make characters and maybe play a session or half a session, and then repeat that cycle over and over again.
Yeah, I really enjoyed from that system though, where the flaws that you could like grab flaws to get more points to buy more things, and I felt like the flaws would have been great for role playing purposes,
They can be, but systems like that oftentimes you get players that are trying to figure out like the
like how to
optimal
power
amount
game
of
it.
flaws and then figure workarounds for their flaws. You know,
Yeah, I can see that
like
happening.
they want to build Daredevil who's blind, but not really because his other senses are so enhanced, so that it minimizes it. But they got the points anyway. That's
Yeah,
that.
which in other systems, it's something that you can just flavor in. It's like,
Yeah,
oh, yeah, my character's blind, but he's aware of his surroundings.
one of my favorite supers game is Mutants and Masterminds. And then what they did with that was they moved away from a flaw system that gave you points to building your character to a flaw system that whenever a flaw actually disadvantaged your character, you would get an in-game Benny for that to expend during the game. So So it encouraged people more or less to role play the situations and the flaws to get the bennies, and it wasn't front loaded like a lot of other systems. But and that probably came about just from like them seeing, okay, people are going to try and abuse and break this. It's kind of, I guess the way 5e does it is similar to that, but I feel like it rarely comes up because the flaws tend to be more like personality traits than anything.
Hmm.
And I don't know any DM that has all their players' characters, flaws, bonds, and ideals all memorized.
Yeah, it's more of like as a DM, what I would do is help my play, especially if it was first time players. It's like, okay, yeah, you've got this flaw that you've chosen. How are you going to incorporate this into your role playing, and how can this be something interesting? How can this make you quirky? Um, how can this sort of this flaw help you bring your character to life? Um, but yeah, memorizing what it is sometimes difficult. Also, for some players, depending on the flaw, I remember there's one that I really enjoyed, which was your character always says like impressive words without knowing what they mean exactly.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, actually role playing it out as a player, you need to sort of have those words in your mind and think about how you're going to use them, and it can definitely be challenging, right?
I know one of the games that I played in, Master of the Game is another YouTuber, and his character had like either the ideal or personality trait. It was like I always make a plan, and then the flaw is I never stick to the plan. So like during the session, his character would make these elaborate plans and then immediately break them right away. And it's one of the few instances that I actually remember a player, really diving into that
Uh-huh.
aspect of the character sheet.
Yeah, that definitely sounds fun.
It was definitely a lot of fun. I think it was at Gen Con 50 actually. We just did like a pickup game between between a handful of us and started playing. So, do you play your games virtually or in person?
Bit of both. Over the last few years, it's been more virtual, mostly on Discord. But before uh, before the pandemic and all this, we definitely played in person.
So, are you running regular games now using QuestHaven?
No, no,
Is it still in
we've sort of
development?
done a small mock-up of a game,
Okay.
um, but really it's right now QuestHaven we've been working on the world builder. And it's more of using the world builder to build maps, and then you can stream the game as a GM at the moment.
Mm.
But right now we're transitioning from working on the world builder to finishing up the player tools and bringing in the multiplayer uh, online. I
When
mean,
are
part
you
of multiplayer
guys?
is already there in that you can share your maps online with other
Okay.
people. You can see what other people have made, which is really cool. Uh, but we're still in development.
When is the estimated date of arrival?
Uh, that's the question that has many parts to it, right?
Uh,
But I'd say I can see the beta while we were shooting for this March originally with the Kickstarter.
mhm.
I can see the beta being closer to Q3 2023, and hopefully have a full launch before the end of the year.
So have you guys started like developing a community around Quest Haven? Are people able to start playing with the world builder? Or is it being released
Yeah,
in okay.
yeah. So we had a Kickstarter back in April last year, and we definitely have a Discord community where people are building things and sometimes sharing what they do. Although you can see it directly in game as well, like what people build in their maps and so on.
And so how big is the Quest Haven team?
Well, we are 8, and that's between our producer and developers and artists, and a few contractors as well. But
So
it's a giant task that we're doing. Definitely an ambitious project.
is this the first project like this for you?
Yeah, of the scale. And luckily we're working with people who also have lots of experience in the field as well. But this is definitely our first project as a studio internally.
You definitely learn a
And
lot on
it's
that first project.
yeah, for sure. Um, and I'm leveraging heavily on my background in project management, which
Yes.
has been great. It's like, how can I make things easier for the rest of the team? Which tools can we automate? Especially because we're bringing in lots of assets. Right now, we've got 5,000 objects that you can place in game, so like parts,
Yeah.
and we're looking closer to 20,000 by the time we're done. Well, I say done because these type of projects are never done. It's like, oh, in the future you just keep adding more stuff to them. That's the hope.
So right now, is it all basically all fantasy based genre?
Yeah, right now it's all fantasy based. Um, but we definitely want to do sci-fi, cyberpunk. We're looking at uh, modern warfare, or if you want to do suburbia as well. But that's going to come closer to launch, if not after launch.
Are the other people on your team, are they also TTRPG gamers?
Some of them, but not all. Though we did ran a one shot adventure with the team just to get them experience on what they're building.
Yeah. No, for
Get that
sure. I
feeling
mean, I've
once more.
definitely know plenty of people that have kind of moved into this industry in different ways and have done the same thing just so people have a better understanding of what it
Yeah,
is.
like for example, the 3D artists. They're not, they had never played tabletops before.
Yeah.
But to make a figure, you're making characters and you're
Yeah.
adding a base to it, so it's not necessary to have that experience. But definitely, all the work that we do when we're thinking of UX, there we talk with the team, like the people who have played, because you to build a good user experience for this, you need to know what you need in order to run a game.
And what's the response been like so far with the world building aspect?
Well, I feel like people have liked it in general. It's definitely been a bit rocky in the sense that what we've released is an early alpha, and there's lots of bugs in there that we've been squashing out. Luckily, the community has been great in telling us like, hey, I tried this thing and it caused this problem. So it's like, oh, great, let's go and fix it, right? Because the first thing to fixing bugs is finding them. So it's been great having the community there for that. And also, there was another one where we used to drag and drop each individual piece into the
Yeah.
map, and seeing how people, when dragging and dropping, sometimes grabbed a piece that they didn't want to and dragged it by accident, made a change to, you select the type of piece you want, and now you start clicking and paste and placing, like, oh, you want to place floors, place as many of them as you want, whereas before you had to Control C, Control V to paste them in. So it's
So
been interesting seeing how people are using it. So
just
that we
more
can,
eyeballs on it, basically more testers
yeah,
helping
yeah,
find the bugs and squash them.
yeah. And it's great that people have volunteered for this.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's exciting and it looks, like I said, it looks really cool, and I feel like as we move forward with RPGs, and we keep trying to find ways to make those connections, even from further away, right? You know,
Yeah, that's definitely a big one. Um, because it's already hard just with scheduling, and then add to that people being in the area, and what if there's traffic? And I feel like with QuestHaven, we've hit an interesting middle ground there, where you get a sense that when you're in VR, you get this sense of presence, and you feel like you're around the table with people next to you, which is uh, it's nice.
So does it only work with VR? Because it says PC and VR.
Yeah, it's not just VR; it's definitely on PC. In the future, we'd like to have a asymmetrical experience with mobile as well. But mostly, we want to bring the party together and not be have as little reasons not to have the entire party together as possible.
Yeah. So how does that work? Like you mentioned with VR, with the VR aspect, you can change your point of reference from being a player around the table to being the mini in the table.
Mm-hmm.
Does that still does that still work with PC? Does it change the view?
So right now in PC, you have a free fly camera, and you can just move around and see from any point of view. But that is definitely something that we'll be implementing in the future, where you change the point of view from your free fly to just snapping to the character's point of view. That being said, it's not going to be the same on PC, but you're still going to get a lot of the experience.
Now,
And
as someone,
even if you're not in VR,
yeah,
like seeing another player be in the character and wave at you is, like while role playing, have the GM take over an NPC and act out a scene as the NPC is going to be interesting for the PC player.
I feel like it's going to be more obscene gestures than anything from my group in the beginning, so they get it out of their system. So,
Yeah.
as someone who's a complete novice and doesn't really know anything about VR, you're like, how much does it kind of cost to get spun up? Like a decent rig to take part in the VR aspect.
It really depends on what you want to do, but we're aiming for standalone VR, so you could just grab a Quest headset. I feel like those are the most like the best bang for your buck,
Okay.
which run, I believe, for $300. I know they have increased their price, so I might be getting that wrong. And with that, you can play it just on VR, or if you want to play it on PC, like you can have a regular laptop and play it on PC, and then have the headset for jumping into the VR for a bit. We're trying to get it to a point where if you buy it in one place, you have it everywhere.
Okay. So, like, what is the interface like? I'm just picturing like I hate first person games because I just end up stuck in a corner.
Yeah, there's definitely since we're working on the player tools, there's lots of work there. But for example, in VR, how we currently have it set up, you want to pull out your character sheet, you grab behind your head, you pull it out, and now you've got your character sheet in front of you. So kind of like pulling a sword out, and there you've got your references.
And then do you interact with the game world via your character sheet, or is
No, the character sheet's more of a reference. So the approach that we've gone with is we're trying not to make a full-on game with all these built-in systems, and more of like an environment. We're definitely going to see where we can add some automation to help the player, but it's more of you're around a table, except that we don't have a table. The table is this huge world.
right?
But you're a giant in this world, looking down at the world, and you can move your figure and you can roll your dice. And if you want, you can become the figure.
And so how does like the dice rolling work?
Being around the table. Sorry?
How does the dice rolling work?
So right now that's actually a system we are reworking. But you bring up a wheel and you select which types of dice you want, and you let them go, and it'll shoot at the dice. And what we're reworking is we're now adding the dice log so that you shoot at the dice, they disperse, they disappear, and they fly into the log so that you can see the results as well.
Okay. Will you guys eventually be selling digital dice?
Yeah, we actually have for our Kickstarter backers, we had a special Kickstarter dice. And we plan on giving players lots of options for the dice, and I can see it being having like some cosmetic dice. Someone in our community even suggested reaching out to one of these dice creators
Yeah.
and like trying to bring their dice into VR and the digital. I feel like there's some
I don't know if
interesting.
you've seen the Bluetooth dice.
Uh-huh.
Where
Yeah.
is that what you're talking about?
No, I was just talking about bringing in like models
Oh
from
yeah.
dice creators. So like people who make dice on Etsy or have their dice shops, like, oh, let's make a digital version and get them in the game.
Are you guys
Uh,
planning on having like a marketplace?
yeah, yeah. It's we're planning on having a marketplace in the future, mostly for content. Uh, we we feel like it's a way where if we can get third party creators in there to to have their modules,
Hmm.
and even if the main module creators, like the main content, wanted to sell their content in there, we'd be open to that as well.
I don't
But there's huh?
I don't know, like, I know like for D&D Beyond there was APIs that you could use with Roll 20.
We don't know what's the future with that though. So
Yeah.
it's that's why we're going with this approach of you bring into this your references that you have, and you could have your physical book next to you on the PC and just you
Well,
know
what I was gonna say is where I was going with it is Nexus just announced a 5e module, and they've
mhm.
already had a few other things. They have Pathfinder and Vampire, I think the Marvel superheroes game, and the one of the chief architects behind Nexus is Adam Bradford, who was the chief architect behind D&D Beyond,
Mhm.
and and I think their thing now is to actually stay away from anything with Wizards of the Coast, and where they could never get third party stuff into D&D Beyond, they just want to use if I'm understanding it correctly, they want to use the Creative Commons and then bring in as many third party publishers as possible into there.
Yeah, I mean, we would be open to bring whatever people want to bring into the platform. That's where we're trying to be a very open when it comes to that. And
Well, sure, you kind of have to be. Like, what are people going to play if not like the games are out there or whatever?
mhm.
Uh, so, do you have plans to move into other genres? Oh,
um,
I asked you that already. You did
like
answer it.
in
I'm
other
sorry.
genres, we're focusing on tabletop RPGs in specific. Like we're
Yeah,
not
yeah.
planning on being a tabletop simulator in general.
I had asked you about fantasy, and then you said cyberpunk and all the
Oh
other ones as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
I think before we got started, we mentioned something about ADHD.
That's
So
that's what I'm having. Like if we talked a bit before we got started, I'm like, oh, what did we talk about already?
yeah. I do that all the time. One of the downsides. Um, what is another game that isn't D&D that you're interested in checking out?
I'm interested in checking out Call of Cthulhu. Someone else mentioned I don't remember if it was Call of Cthulhu, but a game that had these sanity checks as you
Uh,
played. And to me, that system sounded very interesting.
yeah,
Um,
I've not actually played Call of Cthulhu, which is surprising, but yeah.
I had written up a world with a friend because we were back in the day. We were like, oh, let's write a fantasy novel, and we got around to the world building, and we never actually got around to actually writing it.
Yeah.
Uh, but I'd be interested in running some of that where we had an interesting idea where the more that people used magic, it would affect their physical body. So like if there's a fire mage and they're constantly using fire magic, it might at first make them more prone to anger, and at later tiers they become an elemental and they're no longer an actual like they're no longer in control.
Okay.
So something like that, I feel like might be interested in running some system, something that incorporates something where a system like that where you need to be careful with your actions and they can be sort of longer lasting consequences.
Oh, so we had run a game. We did like a 13 episode campaign using a system called Open Legend, which is very it's like kind of a generic RPG.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided we wanted to use magic, but in this particular setting, the only safe way to use magic was through almost like an artificer through devices, um, because it was dangerous to channel through your persons. But that being
Mm-hmm.
said, there were definitely people that did that, and if you did, you had a greater chance of failing or taking on corruption. Instead of insanity, we used corruption. And if you had too much corruption, then you could go insane and become crazy.
Yeah.
But
I
you
feel
could
like
also,
corruption, sanity, it's
yeah,
this basic system. There was it's not Dragon Age, but there was one of these dragon games that had that as well, where it's like the more that you use your skills, you could run out of your character could sort of become the bad guy if
yeah.
you weren't careful.
And that was kind of the idea. It's like, you could technically fail or you could succeed if you tap into this other thing. And of course, my player that was playing that, they tend to be a bit chaotic, and by the end, they're on the verge of becoming one of the bad guys for sure. But yeah, I do. I absolutely love that kind of stuff. Like I said, I haven't. I've read a lot of Lovecraft, but I have not actually gotten a chance to play Cthulhu yet, or Call of
Mhm.
Cthulhu yet. And part of it, like part of me, is like a little bit. It's like I feel like to play that game right, you have to like by the end of it, your character has to like want to gouge their eyes out and go insane, or you really didn't play Call of Cthulhu. I mean, based on the writings I've read, anyway.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, it's just to me, it's more of whatever system you run. It's more the story that you tell with your group, right? It's an
Yeah.
interactive story.
Well, I'm so glad when I asked you. I will ask people that question sometimes, and they'll say Pathfinder. I'm like, oh, Pathfinder is just another D&D.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, and I'd be happy like if someone approached me and said, "Hey, let's play Pathfinder." I'd be happy to, and I feel like they've got some interesting rules that I've read up
yeah,
on
yeah.
there. That being said, I feel like it's a more rigid system. Um, I I also started looking at Cyberpunk Red.
Okay.
That one's interesting.
I think
Um,
I have that in a stack of books next to me someplace.
you definitely have a very interesting background behind you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a virtual background from
Uh,
from our set. But to my left, I have a stack of all kinds of RPG things, and my pile of shame of the games I have not played yet. Unfortunately, there's just so many great games
that
out there.
sounds like my Steam library.
Sounds like what? Your Steam
My
library?
Steam library.
Yeah. Yeah, or any tabletop gamer, they always have their shelf of shame. I have to
Mm.
I really have to pull back on the number of Kickstarters I back, just because I know I'm going to get them, but I'm never even going to look at the books probably.
I had a friend who we would all buy tabletops,
Yeah,
and even from Kickstarter or from wherever. But then all the tabletops were in this dedicated room at his house, and it
yeah.
was a crazy stack of it with multiple shelves of shame. Although we actually got around to rotating the games quite a bit, which was cool, but
Ted
difficult to
used
play
to
something more
do
than once or twice.
Ted used to do a monthly board game night, and he would have at least three to four spaces where different games would be going on, which was kind of nice. But even then, I felt like I still ended up playing some of the same games just because
Mhm.
you're used to it and they get familiar. It's like why people play D&D, right? And they don't move on to other games. It's just because things are familiar. Or when are you going to get enough people together to play a game of Zombicide? Um, but
Zombie
then
Side
he
is
had
great.
kids, and that was all over.
I used to love. There's a character in Zombicide who his ability is to make noise.
Uh-huh.
So I always like to run around banging a pan, and I kind of felt the role play aspect of it with that character in that game. I was like, oh,
Yeah, that game was a lot of fun. Betrayer or House on the Hill is another one that we would end up playing a lot.
I've actually got two of them right below me because I had one and then someone else gifted it to me. I'm like, oh great, well
Oh
I need to
yeah,
find
yeah.
a home for this.
Yeah, I was over at Ted's the other day. I was like, "Did they come out with a new edition?" He's like, "Yeah, they cleaned up some of the rules and stuff because he's got like several." Because I think at this point there's also like House on the Hill Betrayer, then there's Baldur's Gate Betrayer, and they
Oh,
think they might have did a Scooby Doo one.
the game I really want to play, but ever since I've been developing games, I've noticed that my available time to play is greatly
Uh huh.
diminished.
Yeah, yeah.
But I would like to play Risk Legacy,
Okay.
where it's sort of this ongoing campaign of Risk, where at the end of the game something happens, and then the next match is based on the previous one.
Surprisingly, I have never played a single game of Risk. I all my friends play it, and I look at it and I go, no. Because here's my thing, right? When it comes to like tabletop games, if the game itself takes more than 2 hours,
Hmm.
then I'd rather just be rolling dice and playing an RPG.
Yeah,
It's kind of like my cutoff.
I feel like that's sort of what's happened. I got the game, but really,
Uh,
for playing a campaign, I do prefer playing tabletop RPGs. So yeah, I did play a campaign of a Star Wars tabletop game that was about 6 months long. Can't remember the name though, but it was Imperial Assault, I think it was called.
okay.
Where it's interesting in that it's instead of being the game master with the players playing in this adventure together, it's player versus player. It's a game master against the players. Like the game master is supposed to make the players lose, and the players are supposed to make the game master. Uh, it's not like one wins over the other,
I
which
I
makes for an interesting mechanic. At the same time, it can be a bit salty when there's interpretations of the rules.
I feel like Betrayer's like that too. With the main difference being that like you don't know who the quote unquote enemy's going to be or the GM's
Yeah,
going to be until
yeah,
the haunt happens. So one is kind of random, and
and it's a single
two,
session.
it's always different.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's like it's individual sessions, and it's not like over here. It's you've got the same game master for X amount of months.
yeah.
You, if anytime that there is an interpretation of the rules, it's like it's a group against the game master. Um, so so it's not like the game master. It's not like in tabletop RPGs where it's the game master is always right.
We've had some fun playing the Star Wars RPG from
Mhm.
Fantasy Flight Games. I haven't actually played any of the earlier editions because I believe that's like the third or the fourth version of a Star Wars RPG. But we definitely have had a lot of fun with that one. Also, definitely a very crunchy, non-rules light game. It's like it's a combination of like classes, skill trees, and um like I don't want to say feat trees, but it's almost like that. Uh,
Mhm.
but it has been a lot of fun to play in a different setting, and also too like that's one of the things why like when I move away from D&D, I'm less inclined to go to a game like Pathfinder because I prefer like different genres
Mhm.
instead unless of course someone's like, hey, I got this game I want to run. Like I've played Pathfinder 2e. Someone asked me to be in a stream and we played. I think we streamed like 6 sessions or whatever. And it was fun enough. But I'm not likely to go out of my way to learn a new rule set that covers a niche that's already getting scratched, if you know what I mean. But if someone's like, oh, here's cyberpunk or sci-fi or horror, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm much more excited to learn those rules than another like D&DS type game.
Yeah, I tend to prefer more rules light games where the rules are sort of they're sort of an infrastructure to help you that doesn't require uh, so much time to learn, you know?
Well, if
Especially
you
because our group used to play games once or twice. So if
yeah,
it's going to take 2 hours to learn the game to play another 2 hours, then it's.
Powered by Apocalypse games are great for that
Mhm.
because the first time I played Monster of the Week, I was like, all right, I might have questions about making the character, but other than that, this sounds great. And then like I opened up, basically the character sheet, which they use as what's called a playbook system. For anyone that's not familiar, and basically the playbook just has instructions, and you follow the instructions and make some choices, and by the end you're done, and it takes like 5 minutes or less. Um, it's very simple. It's only like a 2d6 system, and Monster of the Week is like if you're looking for that kind of like horror, that kind of hard genre that's rules light. Like if you like
Mhm.
Supernatural or Buffy, any of those kinds of shows, it's great. It's great for running those kinds of games.
Yeah, I'm definitely sticking with tabletop RPGs for now, though.
Yeah,
Uh, unless it's like occasionally I'll play something like Bang or Love Letter with uh, like these more 5 minute games type
yeah,
of.
yeah, for sure. Also, now it's kind of work for you too, though.
Huh?
It's kind of work for you now too, right? Like, and like you
Yeah, I
mentioned,
actually had this weird situation when Legends of Vox Machina came up,
yeah,
where I was excited to watch it, but the time for watching it was at the end of the day with my wife, and I was like, I would get this anxiety where just even though it wasn't related, it's like, oh, I would start watching and start thinking about some system that
yeah,
I need to do, and then but I forced myself because it was great.
yeah. I mean, season one and season two have been awesome, and now they've got. I think they've renewed for like what another 2 or 3 seasons.
I still haven't watched season 2, so no
Oh,
spoilers.
you're behind.
And I haven't actually live watched the Critical Role
Man,
game.
nobody's got time for that. I like when they started campaign two. We're like,
Uh-huh.
oh, this is like a cool jumping on point. We'll like review the different episodes and talk about them. And like we did it for like 20 some episodes, and then we just like people weren't really that interested in it, and I just don't like watching stream games. I decided, and frankly, for the Critical Role games, the part I
Mhm.
like the least is when Matt's like roll initiative. As soon as they would start combat, I would start falling asleep. My wife would be like, "Are you awake?" Because I would just like stream it to our TV,
Mhm.
and I would start snoozing because to me, that was the least exciting and interesting part of the show. Right? It
Uh-huh.
was the
And
combats.
I've enjoyed seeing highlights of the show. Like over in YouTube, you
Yeah.
constantly get shorts or whatever where you see highlights of it, and it's definitely looks interesting, but it would be a huge time commitment to watch.
Well, each
Um,
episode
you
is
know what?
like 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, you know what show I'm convinced is a tabletop party. I recently watched Willow.
Oh, yeah, the new Willow. Yeah,
Yeah, and I was like, these guys are just playing D&D.
maybe it could very well be, but like
it, it,
that's why I
has,
was
it,
so
it
happy.
has that feeling of how their encounters work and how things come up, and it's like, oh wow.
Yeah, so I will say though, like when Critical Role put out the animated stuff, I love that. Like it's bite size. I can watch it, get into it,
Yeah,
enjoy it,
yeah,
and also like watching an animated combat versus like them just moving minis around on the table, so much better.
yeah. And what I love about it is uh, if you played tabletop games, you sort of recognize how things happen. It's like, oh yeah, that happened
Yeah.
You get that feeling like, oh, this was an encounter, and this was a failed roll. This was,
You get to call out the crit successes and the
yeah,
crit
yeah,
fails.
for sure.
So for people like me, them doing the animated version is amazing, and also like not not having to dedicate 4 or 5 hours per episode. I don't know how people do it. That's like it feels like a part time. It feels like a part time job, especially if you're like coming in late, right? Like Ted started watching campaign 2, and he really got
Yeah,
into it. So then he started campaign 1, as well. So like that was a
that's
huge time commitment.
that's why I've never committed to watching Naruto or One Piece or any of these big ones. It's just because of the like. I'm sure they're great, and I did watch the first 30 episodes of Naruto. Um,
Yeah.
but the time commitment to it is just too much for me.
So you mentioned like watching shows and thinking of different systems. Is there any specific instance you can think of where it vastly changed the direction of what you're doing?
Yes, I'm a huge fan of lit RPGs. I
Hmm.
will. That's my main media consumption is listening to audiobooks of lit RPGs. For those of you who don't know, it's a genre where typically either the player is stuck inside an MMORPG or the 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 world that they're in or they're transported to has game mechanics where there's progression and leveling up and all these other things. And I've definitely borrowed some fight mechanics and some things that I've seen in these games into the games that I run.
Nice. Well, I
Um,
mean, even for gaming, like I feel like as a GM, you should be always grabbing inspiration from wherever you can get it from.
yeah, for sure.
So, um, what what is the games that you're playing in now? Are you running them currently, or or playing as a player right now?
I just made a character
Okay.
yesterday, and we're gonna start a game next week. It's going to be in on the Strixhaven setting, but like the world, but not the actual module. So like the same physical location, but it's going to be post where the campaign is set because we didn't want to be college students studying for their owls or what you call them, their exams, right?
Yeah. So,
Um,
what is the draw to playing Strixhaven without being like at wizard school?
I feel like it's sort of this wizard city and this wizard school.
Okay.
I'm not the GM on this one,
Yeah, yeah.
so I don't know. I feel
You're
like
just
it's
along for
going
the
to be
ride.
part of a murder mystery. Maybe students have
Yeah.
gone missing, or maybe one of the dragons went missing. I don't know. The GM's going to
Because
have.
I just feel like the draw to that book is being a wizard student.
I feel like the GM liked the buildings and how they looked,
Okay.
and the like it's going to be a wizard story, and it's everyone is in a magical setting. Like everyone is a graduated from Strixhaven.
So you guys are playing. Basically, you guys are all playing as alumni.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
But I don't know where it's going to go because we haven't
It's an
started.
interesting concept. Um, and I wasn't really trying to poo poo on it. Just to me, it's like, oh, the idea of doing this thing. But it is cool to see where someone can take that inspiration, and be like, well, that's how you're supposed to use it. But I think it'll be cool to do this.
Yeah.
So what are you playing?
Um, I, that's a spoiler for for the party, but I'm playing as a mute character who has a imp familiar,
Okay.
and he is focused on light magic.
Oh, so does the imp do all the talking?
Yeah, yeah.
Nice. So does that mean
It's a bit
warlock?
homebrewed, as you can see.
Yeah, yeah. Does that
But
mean warlock?
maybe, maybe.
I see you're keeping it tight to your
Last
vest.
question. No, I don't think they're going to watch it. The concept is that my actual character is the imp, and he has to. I think it was from D&D Shorts, one of these things where there's this evil creature that has to do good because they got tricked with making a pact with either a warlock or a cleric or with a good thing, so they get their powers for doing good. So the whole concept of it is the imp needs to do good, and he's constantly complaining about having to do good.
Oh, nice. So that he can win his freedom back?
Yeah, or become more powerful, and so on.
I think
we'll see where it goes. It might be one of these, we play one campaign and one session and it's over, or maybe a couple.
Does your table suffer from a lot of fizzle?
Well, this one that we just played, Last Man in Fandover, it was a new group, lots of new players. So It started out with 9 players, and we ended up 3.
Oh, yeah. That sounds typical.
Yeah, but that's what you get when you're trying to bring new people into the game. It's like some people will find that it's for them, and some might
scheduling is always a bitch.
Yeah, scheduling is a big one.
So, how often do you guys game? You play? Oh no! Did you freeze on me? We now have JPEG Alejandro. Folks, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and if Alejandro gets unfrozen, we will ask those questions.
Hello.
Hello. We have two Alejandros.
Oh, am I back?
You are back.
Are they both back? Because I feel like my internet dropped.
Yeah, there you go. Now it's just one.
Okay. All right.
You were JPEG Alejandro for a while.
Yeah, my internet dropped apparently.
Happens to the best of us.
Mm-hmm.
So I was asking you how often, how frequent do you guys play?
Once every other week ish. It's supposed to be once a week, but really,
yeah,
it's been once every other week.
So what we ended up doing is we play 3 Saturdays out of the month. So me and Ted are in all those games, but the tables are basically different for all of them. So we just basically play basically 3 monthly games essentially.
Okay.
Usually usually 2 of them are D&D. Me and Ted each run a D&D game, and then the third game we rotate out GMs, and it's usually a not D&D game. And we've been doing that for years now, and we've had the most success with that as far as player retention.
I can imagine, because it's easier to commit to once a month.
Yes.
As a player, right? Than once a week.
The only downside is it takes us forever to get through campaigns. Like literally, we play like a campaign a year for each of those games.
I mean, my last campaigns I ran, it was 2 years playing once a week. So
yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, so we generally run like 12-ish sessions per campaign, so it takes about a year to get through them.
Okay.
But we've done that too in the past. But like honestly, those games, we'd always fizzle, right? Like the GM would get burned out, players would leave, or you get new players.
I feel like it's better to make the campaigns shorter, and maybe in a consistent setting, but you get that sense of closure for each one before having it sizzle out.
Yeah, and that's kind of like what we went for. And also too, when you can go to somebody and say, hey, do you want to play these 12 sessions? And you're asking them to commit to a specific number, I feel like they're more likely to stay committed to it. And then as a GM, it's easier to not burn out because you know you like there's an end in sight, right? And you know you have an
Yeah,
arc you're trying to fulfill.
yeah, that definitely happened to me as GM, where I would start canceling because I was overwhelmed with work that week, or
Yeah,
you know, um, and it's never good to cancel as a GM. It's never good to cancel as a player, but as a GM, it's worse because they
it is
just can't
worse.
go without you.
So a quick reminder, everyone, you can find a link to QuestHaven down in the description, so you can go check things out. Check out the demo video, see what it looks like. It looks really cool. Even cooler now that I know that you can jump into the mini and be look at things through the mini's perspective. But we are just past the hour mark. Final thoughts before we head on out?
Um, yeah, I mean it's been great talking with you and talking about different tabletop RPGs. Uh, yeah, feel free to check out QuestHaven. It's I feel like it's a very unique project and something you might like.
Awesome. Thanks for being on. And until next time, everyone, stay nerdy.
Bye.